putting these. Well, so that's the whole problem. They don't.
Well, that was the big
Well, that'll put the kibosh on it.
Yeah. You can't, or you die.
Now, the goal of alchemy, as it says, is ostensibly the creation of gold out of the base metals, although the alchemists were not that naive. They didn't spend century after century trying to get a gold that never existed. The gold for them was a code for the spirit, and it was to their advantage that people thought they were fraudulent gold makers because they would be left alone. And in order to get the gold, and really more so than the production of gold, the primary endeavor of alchemy is the creation of the philosopher's stone, the so-called lapis. And the lapis is how you get the gold. You cannot get the gold without the lapis. It is the elixir. It is the magical principle. Now, the way in which the lapis is created is through the unification of the four elements. In pure form, though, what the alchemists would do would be something like take various kinds of substances, and it didn't make any difference what the substances were. They used anything. Urine, dung, horse dung, cow dung, egg yolks. I mean, they would just use any kind of substance, because theoretically the spirit is in everything. And so it shouldn't make any difference what substance we're using. We can transubstantiate it to bring forth the spirit, and it will be found there. So what they would do is they would take a substance and they would heat it. They would put it in a kind of alembic, and it would go through this process. They would apply fire to it, heat it, and then it would turn into steam, and the steam would condense off into another tube somewhere. Something like that. It's obviously more complex than that. But the steam would then recondense back into a solid, and it would be regarded as a more pure form of what was put in the first place. This is the process of distillation. And they would take a substance and distill it again and again and again until they could refine it, and they would pull out some very refined substance that they would regard as a pure form of one of the elements. Say a powder. It could be anything. They use all kinds of substances. And they go through this process, and the goal is to refine these substances until you get a pure form of each one of these elements. And it will be in some physical form. You might have yellow powder for fire, or earth might be some kind of black substance. It wouldn't matter. There would be these correlates. And then what you would do is mercury and sulfur are the indwelling principles in all of this. And so you would want to get mercury and sulfur balanced. And if you could figure out how to get them perfectly balanced by unifying these strange analogs of the four elements, you could create the philosopher's stone, the lapis. And the lapis there again can't be nailed down as any particular thing. Very often it would be a powder of some kind, a sparkly powder or a yellow powder, and it would be regarded as the philosopher's stone. And that stone would then enable you to transmute the base metals to get the gold out of them. But you couldn't get anywhere without the stone. So the stone is the essential thing. Wolfram von Eschenbach, by the way, in his Parzival, he was living in the time of the Crusades. This is a late, for him it's 1210, right in there, early 13th century, and he actually fought in many of these battles. He comes in after the Grail tradition has been floating around amongst the French, and picks up the whole tradition and synthesizes it with the alchemical ideas, and you get this whole wonderful Germanic, deeply profound, mystical version of the Grail quest. Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival is the most profound of all the Grail traditions because it has all this alchemical symbolism woven into it. And instead of having the Grail as the traditional cup that you drink out of as an analog for the cup of the supper, he has the Grail as a stone. And it was said that the stone was brought down by the neutral angels who did not take sides in the war in heaven between God and the angels. So the pairs of opposites, the leading principle of alchemy is always this unification and balancing of pairs of opposites, light, dark, and the opposite elements. And so he has the Grail as the The Grail for him symbolizes psychologically the maturation of the personality. And so when Parzival finally does attain entry into the Grail Castle, it is only after he has learned the process of being a decent human being, a spiritually informed human being. And so Wolfram is already, in the 12th century, interpreting the alchemical process psychologically by showing you that this whole process is a psychological projection. It is the maturation, growth, and perfection of the personality that we are talking about here. And this is what Jung saw in all of this. What Jung saw is that the alchemists were projecting into these substances, into these metals, the individuation process. And that's why it took them so long. And that's why the texts are so complex. It's a little bit like a painter. You're confronted with a canvas and you pour forth the contents of your unconscious onto the canvas. And who knows what the colors are going to be. It depends on where you're at in terms of your development of your individuation process. Only the canvas here are these metals and various substances. And the degree to which, I mean, you can just imagine staring into a fire. Everyone's had the experience of staring into a fire and being lulled into that trance state. And it's only a very short trip from there to begin the process of active imagination. What if we throw this in? See what happens. One of the late alchemical texts gives you, to give a brief example of what they were up to, although this text has little to do with the actual alchemical process, but it gives you a sense of what they were up to. One of the alchemists says, if you collect rainwater in a series of vessels, and you seal up the vessels and put them out for 10 days in the sun, stuff will collect at the bottom of these vessels, and then you will drain out the rainwater and take the stuff that has condensed at the bottom of these vessels, put them into a round alembic, and take a drop of consecrated red wine and just drop it in and see what happens. And what happens is, he's thinking that this is a miniaturization of God's creation of the cosmos. You are in the role of the spirit hovering above the abyss before creation. And he says, put in another drop of consecrated red wine and you'll see what happens. He doesn't tell you, because he's leaving it up to your imagination to project, to be fascinated and enraptured by the process that's going on. And he says, put in 6 of these drops to imitate the 6 days of creation and you will have an inclination of what God was up to. So that's the kind of thing the alchemists were doing. So it really was on the one hand, a technological endeavor, but on the other, it involved far more of the imagination than anything else. And so what Jung discovered, you'll recall, in his individuation process is that the whole process is activated by engaging some kind of creative act of some sort. Painting, drawing, sand play, it doesn't matter. The unconscious cannot individuate unless it is first projected. You have to get the projection out there. And in this case, he discovered in alchemy that that's exactly what the alchemists were doing. And very often some of the alchemists would have female counterparts, the so-called soror mystica. And the two of them would engage in their various activities. But it was largely a masculine undertaking, although there are some female alchemists.
So this whole alchemy is just an exercise in spirituality until you project on matter, is that what you're saying?
That's right. But the external, the ontology is that why they should do this? Because the spirit demands it. The spirit, unrecognized by the church, is trapped in matter. And man is redeeming, not himself, but the spirit from its prison in matter. So you were helping the process of the spirit. That is the incentive for them to do it. And that's what they believed that they were doing. But then Jung says they were actually redeeming their own psyches. They were bringing up contents from the unconscious. And so in bringing up contents from the unconscious is analogous to transmuting base metals into the gold through the principle of unification of opposites. Mercury and sulfur are analogs for the conscious and the unconscious mind. And the fusion of the two of them together, very often Mercury and sulfur will be personified as a king and a queen who mate, dissolve into each other, and produce a hermaphroditic child as a result of that. And that is an illustration, a metaphoric transformation of the process of Mercury and sulfur united together to produce the lapis, the stone. It's also called the Filius Philosophorum, the son of the philosophers. So they personify. All these concepts are personifications of what's going on in these chemical processes. Joyce, did you have a question?
Yeah, did you write the Holy Bible over there?
No, I know the book. I haven't had a chance. Um,